Hi, it's Alan with Stillwell Performance here at the Stillwell Performance Race Shop, and we're going to take you through some factory tuning tips on a couple of really sweet KTMs, including this brand new sweet 2015 ISDE Model 350. We'll start at the front with some good tips on what to do with your new KTM. You get these things home, and I know you're going to be just dying to go out and ride it, but if you spend a couple hours getting it dialed, it'll give you a lot more enjoyment and a lot less trouble going on down the road. So even though the bike's new, we really suggest sit down and go through all your spokes. Make sure they're tight. Make sure your rim lock is tight, and if you're running tubes, as this new bike is, make sure that you don't have the rim lock nut too tight, because if this tire were to slip, pull the rim lock, or excuse me, the rim lock might get loose, pull that tube loose, and now you've got a flat tire. Get yourself some good anti-seize. Pull all these upper and lower triple clamp bolts out, put a dab of anti-seize on them and run them back in. You'll find when you go to torque the bolts that you get a lot better torque spec reading off of it, because on these new style KTM WP uppers, you really don't want to over tighten this, because you will get some binding in your bushings. That'll make for a pretty stiff and sticky ride. Up here, this bike came to us from the customer with his steering stabilizer already in place, but underneath here he's using, as you can see, the stock lower handlebar mount. The bolt that goes up in here can sometimes not have enough Loctite on it, so we recommend you pull that out, take some red Loctite. You don't want this coming loose, so we use red Loctite here, and it's an 8mm Allen. Crank that thing down pretty good and tight in there. At the same time, excuse me, you can pop these off if you choose to and re-lube your upper and lower steering stem bearings. We have found that a lot of the new bikes, the new Huskies and KTMs, are coming, and the grease on them is pretty sparse. So take some time, take a look at those, and make sure that they have enough grease on them. That goes for the axle as well. You don't know who put your bike together at the shop. It could be a whiz kid, or it could be somebody who just started out and they don't know how to properly set the front wheel. So we recommend putting the bike on the stand and going through this procedure. This will ensure that your forks stay straight and you don't have any binding. Loosen, but don't remove, these lower triple clamps, the bolts there. Loosen these, your axle clamp bolts, and take your bike and ride it very slowly down your sidewalk, your street, or your driveway, and hit the front brake. What that allows the bike to do is essentially line itself up without any regard for where it's clamped on the axles or if there's any misalignment from the upper to lower clamps. You don't have to go very far and you don't have to go very fast, but loosen these on both sides, and then when you come back, you can reset everything after you've lubed your axle, of course, and the front end of the bike will be straight. You've probably noticed, if you take a good digger, that a lot of times the rear wheels, or excuse me, the front wheels going this way and the handlebars are going this way. Anytime that's happened, you should go through that procedure, because you've no doubt twisted your forks, and if you've ever done this procedure where you pull on the handlebars and you hear it cracking, then your forks are bound up. So it's a good tip. We use it here a lot. We like to crash around here, so that's something that comes in handy for us. So moving back a little bit, KTMs are notorious on their rear brake tips for having a pretty sharp point on the last one, right here. So what we like to do is take the tip off and actually grind these last points off. Just grind them completely flush. Use a little Loctite on the two bolts and put it back together. Because if you get bashed by a rock or a log and this goes into your clutch case, these points can actually put so much pressure on this that it'll crack that clutch case, and you're out in the woods with a leaking clutch cover, and that's never a good thing. We've noticed on some of the newer KTMs that this bolt likes to come loose, so we would suggest you pull that out and actually, lube that up, or Loctite that up and put it back in. We like to actually take this pin out of the foot pegs and flip it around and put the cotter pin on top. So when you put the pin in that way, your cotter pin's safe up on top from rocks and roots that tend to scrape there when you're in the deep ruts. We learned this trick the hard way through Endurocross because we actually had one of the pins, the cotter pins, shear off, and the pins start to back out of the foot pegs during a race. So word to the wise, if you ride in a lot of rocks or deep ruts or so forth, turn those around. It doesn't do anything but help you. This is another bolt on the back of your your brake lever that likes to come loose. Make sure you keep this tight, and a little bit of Loctite here works quite well. This is one of the KTM PDS bikes. This heim joint down here really takes a lot of abuse. There's a lot of pressure it has to go through, a lot of torque, and it's just back here where, you know, mud, water, a lot of glop gets in there. So you might want to pull your shock off and give it a good lubing with some heavy-duty waterproof grease back here before you ride. We don't recommend doing anything but some Loctite on these bolts. They ride freely within the bushings. The top bushing on the KTM shock always seems to be good, so we don't really have a problem with that. Before you ride your bike, we'd recommend you take the rear wheel off, take these chain adjuster bolts and run them all the way out. That bolt actually goes into about right where my finger ends here, and they're notorious for locking up in this aluminum swing arm because you've got a steel bolt and aluminum swing arm, and that's dissimilar metals. So grab that same little tube of anti-seize, lather those threads up and run that bolt up in there a couple times. You'll find that it'll last a lot longer. Same thing with your brake pins. Give it a little bit of anti-seize in there, not too much because you don't want that anti-seize to get on your brake pads, then they're done. These rotors come from the factory with a tiny, tiny bit of something called cosmoline on them, and it's a protectant that keeps the disc rotors from rusting in transit. So put it up on a stand, get some brake cleaner, spin it on both sides and clean those, and that goes for the front one as well. One of the things that we like to do, especially in the Endurocross races, is to take the master link off the chain, pull the pin out, flip it around, and put the master link on from the other side. That means that as your chain's going around, if your chain guy gets a good bashing, or if you get in the rocks and rocks are up in here and you happen to roll back, that pin won't, the clip won't come off. It's a good tip for really anybody, motocrossers or anybody, because you just don't know who's going to be slamming into you and, you know, knocking your chain pin off, your master link off. KTM's, these little bolts right here for your chain guide really take a beating, so you want to keep an eye on these. These can actually bend, and the back one here is not that long, and it tends to want to back out. So a little bit of Loctite on that, but just take your 8 millimeter and go to work on those pretty frequently. Lube your axle. Again, KTM's and Huskies don't seem to be coming with an abundance of grease on them these days. Another part of a KTM you want to keep an eye on when it's new is this little bolt on your shifter right here. These things just love to come loose. They have a little bit of a dome washer on them to keep them tight, but they seem to come loose pretty good. Same with your countershaft bolt. While you've got the bike new, put it in gear, step on the rear brake so the wheel and the motor don't turn, and give that thing a good tighten. Check all your little bolts up in here. We've noticed on some of the KTMs, the air filter cover has tabs. You have to be really careful when you reinstall it that you get the tabs started right. And we'll see if I can get this right the very first time. Like that. So these sit in here. Keep the airbox cover nice and tight because you can pull it loose with your boot. We've had some guys that can actually pull that right off, and off she comes right in the middle of a race. Top off your coolant. Make sure your radiator hoses are tight. Take an 8 and 10 and 12 millimeter and 13 millimeter T-handle and go over the bike from top to bottom. Give yourself a good hour and you'll be surprised. Even though it's brand new and from the factory, we've found some really crazy bolts that come off of the thing, and you wouldn't expect that they would on a new bike. We call them Monday morning bikes because I think the Austrians like to drink on the weekends and then they put a bike together Monday and it may not be as good as it should be. So, last tip for your new bike, KTM likes these steering stops to stick out quite far. You can see on this bike that the turning radius on it is not really good. Even with these bulletproof guards on that the customer installed, there's still, gosh, I would say close to 25 millimeters, probably an inch between the radiator guard and this bolt on the lower triple clamp. So run these in. It'll really help the bike to turn better, tighter in the woods. These 350s can really carve if you have them set up right. And then last but not least, set your sag. We just shot a video on sag that you can find on our YouTube channel at Stillwell Performance or at stillwellperformance.com. Get your sag right. It's really important on these brand new KTMs and Huskies. If you don't have the chassis balanced, you're really cheating yourself on getting the most out of the bike and the suspension. And that goes for where the fork is in the clamps as well. On these KTMs, we typically like to start at the second line. You can see this is pulled up through the clamp a little bit further than that second line. When we go through and race prep this bike, we'll actually be dropping that down. We're doing a revalve as well, so this will be completely customized for this customer. This customer is 77 years old. He's been riding KTMs for over 40 years. It's a really great story for another time, but we're really excited. These are great motorcycles, and we're a big supporter of the Orange brand. So hope this helped. Get out there and ride. If there's anything we can do for you as far as suspension tuning or motors or bike setup, and you want to either bring your bike to us here in Scottsdale, Arizona, or ship us some suspension, we'd love to hear from you. Get out there and ride and keep it pinned.